Ready Player Will.
Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. We have a new Guild War map today. It's the Heindler Castle Gate, and so I figured do some map analysis real quickly. We can visualize it together, talk about some team strategies. I'm going to talk through the team that I'm using today, and then we're going to look at 2 Guild War replays against 2 very different teams. But first things first, let's kick off against this map. This is a brand new map to Global. It's a very interesting map from A, not only what areas are non-traversable, but B, how they segregate the units, but also C, just some of the choke points you can encounter, and how some of the topography on the top side of the map here leads to some interesting potential things to do. Now, the map effect is wind attack up. It's 30% magic for dark and earth units. Dagger units get unit res of 20. That's a substantial one. Now, I'm not using a dagger team, and I don't believe I played against one today, just off the top of my head, but that's a substantial buff. For those of you looking for an edge, I am going to try to work in some dagger teams here soon as the week goes on. And then mace and staff units get an extra 20% HP. That's nice, but not nearly as impactful as that 20 unit res. Now, a couple things to note first and foremost. For those of you that aren't familiar with this map, I have these black lines here to indicate areas that have a jump 1 requirement. Otherwise, it's technically a place that you cannot walk through. And so for this map, the sections that are also black means you cannot walk through them. And I have the starting spots with their respective number in each one of these green or red boxes on the left and right side. So as we look at a couple things, some initial quick hit thoughts on the starting spots. Number 1, these slot 3 units are segregated from the rest of the units in that they cannot walk 3 squares to that middle teammate. There is a hard line there that unless you have a jump of 1, you cannot make that. If you do have a jump of 1, that's a very easy move of 3. That's a really big benefit to those characters with that flexibility. But the other 2 units, they can walk to each other. Both of these units have the capability to walk back and forth into each other at just a range of 3 there. Now, a couple other really important things to highlight here. This unit in the second slot is on a height of 0, but both of these units, if they were to move adjacent, have that height of 2. Now, there are some TMRs that do have a height range of 2. I think like the Leela the Bold, agility up 1 comes to the top of the head. I know characters like Shawls, who many of you might be using, her limit break is a height of 2, so there are still enough buffs that theoretically this character in slot 3 can still reach them on this lower plane, but a height of 2 does block out the majority of some of these buffs. And so looking at that slot 3 from their pathing options, they either A, and they do also have a hard wall right in front of them, so they cannot move forward straight ahead, which is kind of nice to make sure that you can't really bait these teams into hitting each other very quickly. But you have really 2 ways to path, and I in all my tests have never seen anyone go this way yet. Certainly possible, but for now, most of the pathing I've seen of these units going either A, through this initial starting area, or straight ahead, should the enemy hate be across from there as well. Now, we just talked about characters that have a jump +1, but the Tourmaline ring is a really powerful accessory here that you can theoretically make this character move to the middle here and buff should you have that Tourmaline ring on. There's an important difference, though, that to keep in mind. The Tourmaline ring up to +5 allows you a jump +1 for 1 turn. A Tourmaline ring +6 allows it for 2 turns. I would highly recommend focusing on which version you have, because it's theoretically possible that should you have enemy hate, let's say starting down here, that this character, if they have, let's say, the +6 version, which gives them 2 turns of the jump, they might move this way first to buff this teammate, and on the second turn, if that tank is still over here on that bottom side of the map, they might come back up this way to the tank, which you might not want, and probably don't want, which would leave them with their teammates way behind. So if you go for that Tourmaline +1, you ensure that they move there once and cannot get back across a second time. Now, I did attempt to see if there was some missile potential here, because the battlefield is 15 squares away overall, and you'll note that this height 3 area does offer some good scenarios for missile units to potentially stand up here on this perch and kind of fire over across the map depending on how quickly those enemies can cross the battlefield. Now, on my original missile test this morning, it still wasn't all that great. They're not the worst, but against the best teams that I was putting them against, they were losing to those best teams. So while they probably have a chance in some capacity, it's still very boom or bust, and it really depends on which missile units you're talking about. Summer Jaden is going to have a very different time than a character like Irvine or Melnia. Same thing can be said for characters that have the move -1 capabilities. Melnia, Rulia, Alaya all come to mind. If you were to bow tie them, so they only have a move of 1, I've actually seen some half-decent things of them being used in either one of these slots in just how far they keep themselves back, and particularly from the slot 2 area where there's a little more in the way of impenetrable objects that enemies tend to not come right up the middle to reach them, but I've also seen conversely them do really good things on the natural high ground of the height of 3 to really get some of that downward trajectory on the enemies. And although the maps start off with some of this janky topography to walk through, once you get through that initial, let's say like 2 turns of movement, it really ends up opening up pretty liberally to this giant area where, yes, although there are 4 areas you can't walk, it's all the same height of 1, and even a lot of the adjacent areas are heights of 2 that you shouldn't have really any difficulty landing large AoE abilities or select 2 or select 3 abilities. But this initial placement here in the middle does allow for some really creative buff opportunities, and I'm hoping to show one today where I am using a team with the Tourmaline ring. And so let's talk about the concept of that team now. Now I'm trying to use a hybrid rainbow team. I know there's 2 water units in here, but I'm using the synergy of the staff Black Mage and the sword Red Mage specifically for the Shinryu card. Now I know Helena is bound to become more popular right now. I really want that reduction in debuff rate applied here so that when enemy Helenas try to reduce my AoE res, or if there's any kind of reduction of healing power down, this team is very sustain heavy, as I'm going to talk about in a second, that this debuff weakening effect is very powerful on Shinryu, and technically on the Glassy sub card here, she also gets it with Faris. Now just for these sub-vision cards, the Summer Glaciella one and the Sildra vision card, which I have here for that slash res pen, as well for just some of the extra spear and crit rate there, but I really have that to ensure that Faris and Glassy can do a modicum amount of damage. A really important thing from the other main slot vision cards here is that I do have Odin as a universal 20 unit res, and the Meeting in the Moonlight vision card actually affects all 3 of these characters as well. This is the other one that overlaps between those 2 classes. This gives the physical human killer up the unit res as well. And the one thing you might notice a little bit different from how I normally recommend teams, I do not have an agility vision card in this main slot. I only have the agility vision card in the sub slot. You normally want both. I'm currently trying to get around that though with this Summer Glassy TMR here, which is the Kefka TMR, which is an agility up buff in addition to the magic percent up, with the idea being that Glassy uses that first turn and hopefully compensates for the lack of that vision card to make sure that their agility values are relatively up to date with some of the other teams. Now, just talking about the equipment choices here, I have the white marshmallow on Helena so that she never gets slept. That's the big thing here. It also does have a ton of accuracy, which is one of her weaknesses. I love to have that. I am focusing on the AoE res of her own weapon, and I do have the Raft TMR here that I want to give her haste should she have the opportunity. And we'll talk about the pathing of the team because I have a lot of toggles off on Faris in particular that I want to talk through. But I also have my Summer Glassy at 30 faith at the moment. I want her to take as little magic damage as possible. Are there chances that her protect may not activate? Yes, there actually is a calculation for that. I won't get into this time, but roughly speaking, it's a 60% chance that her protect will activate. But then again, that's her 3rd priority buff here. Not my biggest concern, but there's really no external healing here either, other than Helena's limit break, and that's a really important thing I want to talk about Faris next. Number 1, I do have her with the extra defense pen of that Ultros Esper. That's really important for me. But Faris is my dedicated support healer and X Factor here, where she does 2 exceptionally important things. Number 1, she dispels all enemy buffs. And number 2, I have one of her main offensive abilities turned off. The one that has the sequence ability that gives the attack and magic and reaction block rate buff to teammates, I have that off. And the only thing I have on for is the one that heals her teammates, and as well as the one that is the restore AP upon kill. But the big important thing for that AI is that healing ability is percentage based, and so is in Summer Glassy's self heal back. It's a percentage base, which means Glassy at that 30 faith doesn't really care that she's not going to receive a lot of extra healing because most of the healing in this team is percentage based. And yes, I am stacking these 2 units with tons of healing power on their trust stones. I also have Faris's move +1 active, and we'll talk through the buff rotation here as well, just to get an idea of what to expect and why I designed the team as I did. Now, the fastest character on this team is Faris, very intentionally. Now, Faris will move 3 squares to buff Glassy with her initial Dispel buff on hits, and then Helena moves second with her teammate buff to Glassy. Glassy will then use that AoE on the three of them. That's the agility up and the magic, and she will walk forward either to the left or the right, depending on where the enemy hate is. But at that point, the reason why it's important that Faris is the faster of the two is because I technically want her sort of lagging behind here. What I don't want to happen is have Faris frontlining too early, using those abilities to heal when everyone's still kind of at full health, and then wasting AP and wasting the usages of that cast. So I have her faster because she's going to actually rebuff her teammate buff to Helena here, which normally might seem frowned upon. It's very much intentionally, because she does have other buffs that are still really good. But Helena then at that point will use her own buff that seals enemy re-raise, and she'll move forward, typically around somewhere in this area, and then Glassy will continue to move forward this way after using her main buff, which is the courage and the heal back. Should Glassy get another buff, she can use that element chain resin to protect, but I really don't need that in this team. The concept of this team is that I'm really trying to limit the amount of imperils. I am happy to go over magic types of teams. I'm also happy for physical types of teams given Summer Glassy's aura. And there's one last thing I want to talk about that's also important, is the Faris move +1. That was very important because since she doesn't really get to move toward the enemy at all in those first two turns, I don't want her lagging behind that badly. I want her to still remain within Glassy's aura, which gives her the physical damage reduction and the accuracy up. So I want Faris to be able to move at the hip, but just slightly staggered behind it. So giving that move +1 means that she can catch up relatively quickly to the two of them. And so the first team here that we're going to watch, I'll admit, is probably not the highest quality team I could have encountered. It's a team consisting of Sephiroth, Wrath, and Renoa. And I did pick this one kind of strategically where I knew I was going to beat most dark teams. This one was a little off-brand with Renoa, but I know that I have the Dispel Haste on Faris's hit, so I'm not worried about Renoa's capabilities there. And I know Sephiroth is going to likely struggle against the amount of physical damage I can prevent here. So we'll watch how this replay unfolds. You'll see Faris uses that Tourmaline Ring to move down and buff Glaciella. You'll then see that Helena comes down and use that teammate buff as well. Summer Glassy will then use the Agility buff up, but not after. Sephiroth uses his teammate buff, that's a Dark and Light res up, and the Scintilla counter ability. Here comes that agility up from Summer Glaciella. Renault is going to move here. We're going to start hasting the team. There's that initial buff from Raph, which is the re-raise and all that. You'll see that there's the rebuffing I was talking about. But now Helena's getting into her main rotation. There's still some pretty good distance here that there's still going to be some more buffs. So here is Summer Glassy's courage and the self-heal back. Overall, the timing of this is looking pretty good. Renault's going to stand still after using this buff of hers, but Faris is going to get the Protect and Shell, the area res and the accuracy up. That's, again, very intentional to keep her just slightly behind to ensure that second buff. And Helena does get the haste one off. She won't always, but this is an excellent setup right now. You can see how close they are together. I get the Protect off here. They're going to start to converge into that center area where there's non-traversable areas. Not taking a lot of damage from Sephiroth to start. That's the typeless ability, or the weapon typeless, regardless. That's the limit break from Raph. You'll see Sephiroth counters both abilities, so he gets Scintilla and Reflex off, but Faris does some of her heal back initially here. You can see they're already back to near full. I'm getting a double sleep here, so this is a really good, obviously, start to things. Renault's going to start the healing process. They're going to get woken up immediately anyway, but they do take the extra damage there. Sephiroth has the defense pen down, which he should hopefully do very little damage here. Now, he does enough to Helena, but the other two barely touched. Helena's going to come in here for another attack now, and I believe it's the area was down, but you can see it's the limit break, I'm sorry. So there's the reflect, and there's the heal back. Again, this team from a sustained perspective going really well. Faris able to kill Raph there. The re-raise, being removed, and then there's Renault. It's kind of like a battle of attrition at this point. Heals herself. I'm sad that Glaciella rebuffs herself here. I wish she didn't, because for now, for my second fight, she will not have that same turn rotation, but overall, this fight ends pretty quickly, and this team functioned exactly as intended. Now, this second fight is a smidge of a mirror matchup. It's actually another Faris, a Summer Glaciella, but it's a Reagan instead of a Helena. And so I was obviously, seeing kind of that mirror matchup, feeling very, very confident in my ability to take on Reagan, with my Helena being the X factor there, where, that amount of physical damage I'm not scared of. And one of Reagan's niches is not light in terms of element res for the buffs he gives. Now, he is very AoE heavy in resistance potentially, but regardless, I'm feeling pretty confident about this. And so Reagan does his initial buff to Glaciella. You can see my rotation's roughly the same here, but my Summer Glassy does not have the TMR buff this time, so she's just going to courage and instead walk forward. Not the end of the world. Would have liked to be a little faster, but I already have the agility edge on this mirror matchup. As you can see, I'm moving faster than them. And so Faris is now out officially of that teammate buff, only 3 usages, so she uses the protecting shell to move forward. I'm still okay with his positioning overall. Glass is still going to frontline with her. I'm still pretty happy about my AP levels overall. You can see I'm able to kind of bait the enemy Faris, and real quickly, that's a great thing for me to see early on here, that I'm able to at least start winning the AP match. There's the remove buff of both of them. Very happy for that. My team is back to full health here for this matchup. Reagan's going to rebuff because I applied the unbuffing, or what do you call it? The dispel, excuse me. I'm able to sleep him and proc his self-heal already. But yeah, that's the beauty of the dispel on Faris. Not only does she get rid of it, but you can get some wonky AI things. Normally, Reagan would have wanted Courage there, but instead he had to reapply that main buff. There, Faris is thinking very hard, wondering how the hell do I do any damage to this team whatsoever. Finally makes a decision and goes for the Demon Purger. Really not that much damage, and I'm happily in that choke point in the middle again now, where there's not going to be a lot of movement. I remove all those buffs again. Any kind of damage I would have taken is healed back up. There, Glassy, uses her limit break. That's cool. Area res up is good against his team. Reagan is able to at least use a pretty good ability there to get his defense pen up, which it's probably going to get reduced again with the Wolven Claws, but that's okay. But I'm doing great against his team health-wise. I'm able to kill Reagan there. No Courage ability. Able to put Faris to sleep here. There's going to be a lot of extra damage done because of the status effect. So there comes the Fangs out. Defense pen down. And at this point, again, it's really just beating up a girl in the courtyard by herself. The enemy Glassy does decently well, all things considered. Helena uses a triple hit there. Pretty decent resistance to it. That unit res doing really well. But again, it's just a matter of time. Helena's going to be able to start casting something, and that's the fight. But overall, hopefully you can see how this team is prime to go against some of these physical damage teams and come out basically unscathed at 100% health. I did also do this test against Soul and those other teams. Obviously against the Soul matchup, my team happily can take some of that on. I have Faris with 50 poison res with the Trust Stone passive, because Ultros also has an innate poison resistance, so that limit break I'm not terribly scared of. There's a ton of unit res in that team. Water versus fire obviously looks really good. Helena can typically get that reflect off from the limit break, so she can reflect damage back to him. I didn't do a ton of testing against other enemy Helena teams, but I would imagine, given how this is set up, it's going to be basically the same logic as the Soul team. I'm really happy with Faris's role here and just being able to constantly dispel things on those enemies. The amount of healing she does is obviously fantastic for keeping the team up. Meanwhile, Helena is able to just kind of work on her own and really thrive with the Summer Glaciella aura of the physical damage reduction, which when you pair that with her own buff of the AoE res reduction, and there's a lot of good things there, that Helena's survivability is very, very strong. But that's the review in a nutshell. Hopefully this is interesting to see that map analysis, see a kind of a unique team that you may not have seen much of, and a little of the atypical toggles and faith settings that you might not think about. But at the end of the day, I hope this was insightful. You learned something, and that's it for now. So thanks for watching. I'll talk to y'all soon.